are beginning the next round table. I'm going to be the coordinator of this second round table. The theme we're going to talk is about the international networks and projects on heritage and climate change. My name is Mauro Garcia Santa Cruz. I'm the director of the Institute for Research in Architecture and Territory, Catholic University of La Plata. I'm also the secretary of ICOMOS Argentina and the vice president for Latin America and the Caribbean at the Climate Heritage Network. Our first speaker is Jenny Hai. She is the coordinator for the Climate Heritage Network North America region. Her academic background is in geography and anthropology. She also serves as the director of operations and development for the Power of Preservation Foundation, based in San Antonio City. And she teaches in the Public History Department at St. Mary's University. Jenny, welcome.
Thank you, Mauro. Thank you so much. Thanks for everybody who's joined us today. I'll share my screen here and we'll get started. I am very excited to provide an update for everyone on the project that we began in just this time last year, called Imagining Futures, funded with assistance from the Mellon Foundation and the 1772 Foundation, and in fact also with support from Alif to actually write the funding proposal in the first place. So I'm so excited to see everyone here today and happy to share the results of the first year. So just a reminder, in case you didn't see our project last year, the Climate Heritage Network embarked on its largest endeavor to date, imagining low carbon, just climate resilient futures through culture and heritage, along with partner organizations that you can see here, including my own, the Power Preservation Foundation, as well as many partner organizations literally across the world. And you're going to see today that the projects funded are not only based in North America, where I am, but also in Africa. The funding specifically intended to support the operations of an African Arab State Secretariat, and they are in fact up and running. So just again, a quick reminder of what the projects were. As we began this, we had two regional activities: the North American Regional Secretariat, which is myself, we are operational, and then the Africa Region Secretariat. My colleague Isaac Esit is very off and running, was hired earlier this year and has been in the position for about 7 months now. And in addition, we have a Francophone working group that is staffed so that we are able to communicate with those countries and colleagues that prefer to communicate in French. In addition to these two regional activities, there were 3 thematic activities which largely were organized around adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. So the first one, the Heritage Apps to Climate Alliance, is being run by the Preserving Legacies organization, which is a collaboration of several people, including Victoria Herman and Andrew Potts, many of you know. The Decarbonizing the Built Environment Through Heritage activity is run by the Built Buildings Lab and Lori Ferris. And then the Race to Resilience Culture is being run by Marisa Kellogg, who is at ICLE, which of course is the Local Governments for Sustainability organization. The outcomes that we were hoping for, we obviously wanted to increase culture-based climate action, to transform climate policy through cultural heritage, and to support our partner communities across the globe. And I think you'll see as we talk more about each project in detail that you will be impressed with what we've accomplished so far. So Mauro mentioned that I have a background in geography, and all that means is that I have to include at least one map in the presentations that I give. So here is my map for today. The Race to Resilience Culture is a project that has built a cohort of cities and municipalities, municipal governments, both in the United States and in Africa, and has created the opportunity for peer-to-peer exchange between these cities. And as you can see here, we've had 31 communities from a wide variety of spaces within these two, within the United States and within the continent of Africa, that have gotten together to identify shared challenges as well as solutions to the problems that they face related to climate action and building resilience within their communities. These communities are meeting virtually, and as you can imagine, that is quite the challenge, and continue to move through a training program together to identify, again, not just shared strategies, but to innovate new options, new opportunities to be able to build resilience, specifically using culture-based solutions within their communities. The second activity that I wanted to give you an update on is the mitigation activity. So this is the decarbonizing the built environment through heritage. This project actually aims to create a toolkit that provide examples of policies and projects that you can implement in your own community. So I've given you the example of the North America list that we're moving through right now, but we've also, we have an enormous number of projects and activities from across the globe. Over 100 have been evaluated so far. And then finally, the Heritage Adapts to Climate Alliance, or HACA as we call it. So this project aims to, again, create a cohort of communities, largely these are NGOs that are working across the world to adapt their spaces to the climate crisis. And to date, we have over 300 members who have joined and are working together, again, to identify shared challenges. The images that you see here are from the border of Mexico and the United States, where this community group of women is working to reclaim agricultural land that had been largely destroyed because of what the barriers and walls that have been put up along the border. So you can see there that they are creating new opportunities for their community to become to adapt to the realities of climate change. So I'm going to leave you with a call to action. So many of you will recall that the Climate Heritage Network for the past 3 years has spearheaded the global call to action for culture and climate. And we again are participating in that effort as we lead up to COP30 in Belém. This year, we are asking everyone to sign up to the We Make Tomorrow campaign, and you can access that through the QR code that's on the bottom of the screen here. It's going to be on the top right of your screen in this slide. And just so you know, this is a really important effort because we are trying to bring 30,000 signatures to the COP30 presidency to show the importance and the support for including culture-based strategies in the solution for our COP30 and UNFCCC efforts. And then finally, I ask that if you aren't already involved in the Climate Heritage Network, I hope that you will become involved. The large QR code in the top center there is to sign up for our newsletter. Please sign up. We also have a circle community that was launched earlier this year where you can actually engage directly with members of the network. We have a very active Climate Heritage Network youth forum. If you or someone you know would like to be involved, they are always looking for folks to join. And then again, if possible, I really encourage you to sign up for that global call and help us support these culture-based solutions to the climate crisis. And that is all from me today.
Thank you, Jenny, for your presentation. At the end of the session, we are going to have a Q&A time. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is going to be Eve Paulus. She is the focal point of ICOMOS Climate Action Working Group and the president of ICOMOS Estonia. She has a master's degree from the Estonian Academy of Arts and the Tartu University on Heritage Conservation and Theory of Culture. Her doctoral thesis at Tartu University deals with community-based coastal heritage management and cultural rights in the face of climate change. Welcome, Eve.
Thank you for having me. Some of the work that ICOMOS and Climate Action Working Group, Jenny has said already, because ICOMOS is a founding member and first Secretariat of Climate Heritage Network, but I start to share the screen now, if I may. If you see, there are two dots in this map. I am now on the 68th north parallel of latitude. That means that very best wishes from Arctic Norway to South America, Argentina, Brazil, and all over the world. And here I see what the change is and what the change scenarios will be. And latest scientific research hasn't been very kind to us. We haven't reached the targets we were supposed to reach. So actually, the adaptation is gonna be to the circumstances that predictions show that are quite strong and big changes to come. ICOMOS has contributed to United Nations report on climate change, culture, and cultural rights. There it is said that climate change and cultural rights share a clear nexus. Culture is closely connected to ecosystems, especially for the indigenous peoples, rural and traditional populations. Both cultures and the environment are often place-based. Culture influences our understanding of the environment and our relationship with it on a deep level. Concern for the welfare for future generations is already explicitly environmental. It should be also cultural. At the same time, cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and creativity are climate assets and should be recognized as such. Arts, culture, and heritage are sources of creativity and inspiration that can help shape the acceptability of policy or system change. Local knowledge supports contemporary mitigation options, from low-carbon, locally adopted approaches to decarbonizing buildings and cultural landscapes, to pointing the way to low-carbon settlement patterns for developing peri-urban areas, to the role of indigenous science in climate-smart agriculture. IPCC 4 report got in the year Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change assessment report got in 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. for showing what 1.5 degrees means for the world and what 2 degrees mean for the world. World Meteorological Organization has affirmed that in 2024 global average was 1.55 from pre-industrial levels. What observed changes and impacts mean in the synthesis report for 2023, it is said that widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. Human-caused climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. This has led to widespread adverse impacts and related losses and damages to nature and people. Vulnerable communities who have historically contributed the least to current climate change are disproportionately affected. Adaptation options that are feasible and effective today will become constrained and less effective with increasing global warming. With increasing global warming, losses and damages will increase, and additional human and natural systems will reach adaptation limits. Maladaptation can be avoided by flexible, multi-sectoral, inclusive, long-term planning and implementation of adaptation actions with co-benefits to many sectors and systems. And that's why I actually applaud to Mauro and colleagues for actually having that Congress that gathers many perspectives and many peoples. Here I probably know, I just show what it is by 2050. That we don't have coral reefs, and it is on the basis of IPCC report 2021. So actually predictions are a bit shorter term might be. Coral reefs are gone. Third of World Heritage glaciers are gone. Methane will actually make a big change. Methane release and World Heritage forests, cities, and so on. It is not the big beautiful picture, but quite disturbing, and it needs all our efforts together to survive. Actually, what is ICOMOS? International Council of Monuments and Sites is the only international non-governmental expert organization of its kind dedicated to promoting theory, methodology, and technology applied to the conservation, protection, and presentation of monuments and sites. With nearly 12,000 members in 130 countries from diverse cultural heritage backgrounds, ICOMOS is ideally positioned to respond to global challenges such as climate change with its extensive expertise. ICOMOS is a strong partner to UNESCO as an advisory body of the World Heritage Convention. ICOMOS Climate Action Working Group is founded in 2016, and it has approximately 140 members. Some of them are among us now, and is actively involved in international and regional climate policies and action. ICOMOS is an observer of UNFCCC and G20. ICOMOS Climate Action Working Group members are among the experts of the IPCC R7 report. ICOMOS is a founding partner of the Climate Heritage Network, Preserving Legacies, Heritage Adapts Initiatives, and the Group of Friends of Culture-Based Climate Action. Climate Action Working Group provides international, regional, and national scientific expertise on cultural heritage and climate action, advocating for heritage in climate policies, empowering heritage communities and professionals worldwide. And here is the map. Where in the green there is a presence of ICOMOS national committees and members worldwide. Here is just a list of some policies that and partnerships and some reports that ICOMOS has produced or ICOMOS has contributed to, including the latest in-process climate action toolkit for World Heritage and existing UNESCO policy document for climate action for World Heritage. ICOMOS says that climate change is the greatest threat facing humanity and its cultural heritage. The gravity of the situation was acknowledged at the 2020 ICOMOS General Assembly, which declared the climate and ecological emergency and called upon other cultural and heritage organizations to do the same. It also called for urgent collective action by all relevant actors to safeguard cultural and natural heritage from climate change, acknowledging that the existing heritage practices, mechanisms, and methodologies may need to change or be supplemented. Assembly significantly resolved that for the first time, the triennial scientific plan was solely focused on climate change action. ICOMOS Triennial Scientific Plan 2024 to 2027 is dedicated to disaster and conflict-resilient heritage, preparedness, response, and recovery, including climate disasters. ICOMOS resolution on cultural heritage and climate emergency seeks to calls to implement heritage responses to climate change that seek to realize the potential of cultural heritage, including both tangible and intangible heritage and local communities' knowledge and practices, to contribute to transformative change, drive GHG mitigation and climate adaptation, and deliver climate-resilient pathways that strengthen sustainable development. Recognize equity and justice as fundamental to understanding and addressing the challenges of climate change, including through solidarity with indigenous peoples and vulnerable and frontline communities, participatory climate governance, and gender-responsive human rights and rights-based approaches. Integrate the conservation of nature and culture, indigenous and traditional knowledge, and landscape-scale approaches into policies and programs where appropriate. Culture plays a fundamental role in shaping human responses to climate change. Recognizing the interconnections between cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and climate resilience, ICOMOS advocates for embedding cultural considerations in climate policies. Heritage sites, tangible and intangible cultural landscapes and ecosystems offer invaluable insights into climate adaptation, drawing from centuries of accumulated wisdom and sustainable practices. Traditional knowledge embedded from nature use and water management to food systems and architecture has long demonstrated its effectiveness in fostering resilience against environmental challenges. Even as tangible and intangible cultures are threatened by a changing climate, cultural heritage offers powerful motivations to act, as well as creative tools to strengthen societal responses. The worldviews, perspectives, and principles reflected in the mindset that values and safeguards cultural heritage contribute to long-term sustainability. In UNESCO policy document on climate action for world heritage, it is pointed out that local knowledge and wisdom and traditional practice represent different knowledge systems that are key resource of information to inform mitigation and adaptation options needed to prepare communities for future climate risks. And among goals of adaptation is said that heritage values can support social cohesion, which is an important element of adaptive capacity. And in the goal of mitigation, it is said that in the context of cultural and mixed properties, and especially for cultural landscapes, mitigation actions based on enhanced land use management should avoid and minimize impact on heritage values, including customary land management practices, consider the concomitant impact on the livelihoods of indigenous peoples and local communities, and be consistent with the state parties' obligations under the Convention to preserve the outstanding universal values. And in the implementation, key considerations is utilizing a place-based approach to contextualize climate action responses, integrating nature and culture in the management of all properties in response to climate change, and respecting the rights and interests of indigenous peoples and local communities. Some examples, what cultural heritage can contribute from traditional architecture and settlement structure. Sustainable architecture and settlement patterns have always been deeply intertwined with culture and climate, as traditional building techniques and settlements reflect a society's adaptation to its environment over generations. Many heritage structures around the world demonstrate how architecture and settlement patterns can harmonize with nature, offering climate-responsive solutions while preserving cultural identity. Traditional knowledge and indigenous practice systems have special importance in dealing with climate change. Indigenous and traditional peoples are constantly collaborating in the management of their environment, as well as the design of structures and technologies, including in times of climate change, where cultural practices handed down over many generations need to be rethought and modified to address changes in seasonality and climate impacts. ICOMOS highlights the creativity and resilience embedded in the climate action of heritage communities. Heritage communities maintain cultural continuity and practices that are adapted to low-carbon nature use, livelihoods that support the biological and cultural diversity of their home landscapes and seascapes. ICOMOS has made climate justice toolkit where it is said that climate change is already impacting communities' culture and cultural rights globally. Disadvantaged and vulnerable populations, indigenous peoples, and local communities dependent on agricultural or coastal livelihoods are disproportionately at risk. Cultural heritage places are living landscapes. They allow people to participate in and contribute to cultural life and are an expression of their cultural identity. Often, they are also the sole source of work or food for communities and are therefore essential to their survival. When such places are at risk, the existence of associated communities is threatened. ICOMOS resolves to take cultural rights and cultural impacts into consideration in responding to all aspects of climate change and in climate action. Prioritize the need for an especially urgent, effective, and concentrated global effort to prevent the cultural extinction of heritage and related communities facing particular threats from the climate emergency, such as those in polar and coastal regions, including indigenous peoples and those living in small island states. UNESCO World Heritage Operational Guidelines, ICOMOS contributed to implement there the wording of human rights-based approaches. So actually now states parties to the convention are encouraged to adopt human rights-based approaches and ensure gender balanced participation of a wide variety of stakeholders and rights holders, including site managers, local and regional governments, local communities, indigenous peoples, and other interested parties and partners in the identification, nomination, management, and protection processes of World Heritage properties. And legislation, policies, and strategies should promote and encourage the active, effective, inclusive, and equitable participation of the communities and indigenous peoples. And who are the rights holders? The rights holders are communities of practice and of place. And what are the rights of the communities? Not only procedural rights, prior informed consent, but constitutive rights, right to define, govern, and protect cultural property, and exclusive rights as it comes to the livelihoods of the traditional fisheries or land use or forest use practices or traditional practices to continue and maintain those practices. And there are different types of rights as it comes to tangible heritage, intangible heritage, and cultural landscapes. And enforcement is within public law, private law, or customary law. And the catalogue of rights are rights to use, cultural rights, and property rights. And to end my presentation, I want to highlight the South American great contribution of many parties, including ICOMOS and Climate Heritage Networks and others, on Brazilian Charter on Cultural Heritage and Climate Change. It is really, really great work. And I would like to end with a quote from Vice President of the ICOMOS Americas, Leonardo Barci Castriota, that traditional peoples and communities are the backbone of heritage preservation. They hold ancestral knowledge, traditional practices, and deep-rooted connections to the sites and values that make up our shared human legacy. In a context of increasing extreme weather events and environmental transformations, community engagement is not only necessary, it is essential. It enables the identification of risks and vulnerabilities and fosters the development of resilient and context-specific adaptation strategies. These communities are not passive victims of climate threats. On the contrary, they are active agents, deeply familiar with their territories and capable of innovating in the protection and transmission of cultural values. Their participation ensures that proposed solutions are not only technically sound, but also culturally appropriate and socially sustainable. In this sense, climate action becomes an opportunity to strengthen social bonds, to reaffirm ethical principles of well-being and coexistence. The Brazilian Charter is a collaboratively built document that highlights the urgency of integrating cultural heritage into climate change strategies. It affirms that heritage is not merely something to be protected, but a key instrument for building resilient, just, and sustainable societies. The Charter recognizes that the impacts of climate change are unevenly distributed and disproportionately affect vulnerable territories and communities. It calls for the appreciation of ancestral knowledge and cultural practices as part of the solution, working in cooperation with science and technology. And with that applaud to South America, I would like to end my presentation. And more information on Climate Action Working Group can be found on the Climate Action homepage. Thank you, Mauro. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Abe, for your presentation. I remember all the participants that we are going to have the Q&A moment at the end of the session. We are going to present now our next speaker. Sophie Abram is project manager at the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage, where she oversees a diverse portfolio of projects at the crossroads of culture, climate change, and conflict. She is a recognized specialist in post-disaster needs assessments for the cultural sector. She holds a master's degree in risk analysis and a Bachelor of Arts in Development Studies from King's College London, University of London. Welcome, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Mauro, and thank you very much for this opportunity to be here with you today. So thank you again for this opportunity to present on ALIF's strategy and action on climate change, and very pleased to meet you all. So just very quickly, a presentation overview. I'll spend a few minutes giving you an overview of ALIF for those who don't know yet about the fund. Then I will move on to explaining a little bit more about sort of the key pillars of ALIF's recent climate change strategy. And then really from, again, a funder's perspective, I'm really trying to shed some limelight a little bit about how we work through particularly our call for projects by giving you a specific example of one of our call for projects targeting climate change and cultural heritage. So about ALIF. So ALIF is the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage. We were established in 2017, and we are the main global fund exclusively dedicated to the protection of heritage against the impact of conflicts. And more recently, in 2023, we expanded our scope to climate change and also other disasters. We are a private foundation under Swiss law, and we are based in Geneva, but we do also have the privileges and immunities of an international organization, which is quite essential to our operations and being able to work in some of the contexts that we work in. We're very much a public-private partnership, so we are made up of our constituents are member states. So we have a total of 9 member states who, some of whom contributed to the foundation of ALIF at its very onset, but also are very important contributors and donors to ALIF. We also have a number of private foundations, private members and foundations such as the Getty, and we also work with a number of other organizations in the context of different sort of partnership agreements and memorandums such as the EU, Switzerland, the US Department of State, Oman, Monaco, and Romania, to name a few. We very much position ourselves as a neutral instrument in the multilateral world, meaning that whenever there is a need to protect heritage, we attempt to be there. Our objectives are sort of axed around very much peace and development. So ALIF finances and accompanies cultural heritage projects that really are targeting the building of peace as well as sustainable development. In which fields? We have a very broad definition of sort of the fields of the culture fields that we work in. We work on intangible heritage, but also related crafts. We, of course, work on monuments and sites, including World Heritage sites. We're also very interested in movable heritage, such as manuscripts and documentation such as archives. We also work, of course, with cultural institutions such as museums and also on their collections themselves. And we have sort of a small wing of our work that does sort of deal with the fight against looting and illicit trafficking. So all sort of aspects that can support the 1970 UNESCO Convention. Our actions in this area are a little bit more axed around capacity building to support authorities and other actors to support their objects against looting and illicit trafficking. Where do we operate? So as I mentioned, the genesis of ALIF was very much in conflict and post-conflict areas. And this can be zones where you see interstate conflicts, but also acts of terrorism or civil war. And more recently, since 2 years, we have expanded to, all regions, all countries in the world, because unfortunately everyone is fighting climate change. So this has really sort of broadened our scope and our footprint globally. In terms of timeline, we work across the spectrum. So it can very much be before an event happens, before an emergency occurs, very much focusing on preventive actions, especially in cases of either imminent and high risk, imminent collapse, for instance, following an earthquake. We can also work during an emergency by focusing on sort of like very urgent actions. And of course, after, we have a number of very large-scale projects that cover the rehabilitation, reconstruction, and broader recovery of our work. So as a international fund, we have a number of procedures, and we can round them down to sort of 3 key procedures. First and foremost, we have what we call our annual call for projects. So we open sort of a call for projects, and at the beginning of sort of ALIF's journey, these were non-specific. So anybody tended to be a little bit less specific. I mean, they were open to any regions facing conflict and post-conflict, but as the years went on, they'd become a little bit more specific in scope. So for instance, we've had annual calls for projects on specific countries and emergencies. And more recently, for instance, they have sort of a scope that is more specified, such as climate change, for instance. However, we're obviously cognizant of the fact that emergencies happen all year round, and therefore, an annual call for projects is not enough in that sense. And so we do have an emergency mechanism that is open all year round in case of need. And then finally, we have what we call action plans. And these are slightly different in the sense that it is in some ways a predefined envelope of funding. And then from that, projects can be submitted and selected. Often action plans tend to be country specific. So for instance, we had specific country action plans in Morocco or Libya following the devastating floods. I think it was in 2021 and 2022. We do have quite a rigorous criteria when it comes to selecting our projects, and we have a number of sort of evaluation committees and steps that do take place. But of course, what we look at are kind of broadly the relevance of the proposal to ALIF's mission. Of course, the quality has to be very high. There's also feasibility in terms of implementation arrangements, context, and timeline. And finally, and of course, this is linked to our overarching goal, sustainability. So kind of really demonstrating that broader sustainable social and economic impact. So in a nutshell, ALIF is kind of touching on its 8 years of operations now. So we're still very young in that sense, and still, expanding to different areas, but we've already implemented 500 projects. We're present in more than 40 countries, and we've committed almost $100 million to the protection of heritage in these areas. And we have a very vast network of partnerships of more than 150 local, but also international operators. And just here, as a map, I'm also a geography major, so I have to put a map in all of my presentations. So just here's our latest map of sort of our operations. And just a couple of months ago, a big part of Africa wouldn't have been in orange, but we've just closed our African climate change call, which has enabled us to reach a number of countries. So it's a very exciting time at ALIF. So onto our climate change strategy. ALIF's climate change strategy was elaborated in 2023, and it sort of has these two axes to it, which is that there's a clear acknowledgement that climate change is, of course, impacting cultural heritage around the world, and cultural heritage in its diversity, living or tangible, but also the sort of crafts and creative industries. But on the other hand, cultural heritage also has a role to play in the fight against climate change. So, for instance, traditional knowledge systems can be very important repositories of, knowledge around resilience and sustainable practices and strategies. The culture sector is great at knowing how to use sustainable and local materials, and in this sense, kind of contributing to sustainability and shortening supply chains. But also when it comes to maybe recovery and rehabilitation, the culture sector can always be confronted with seeing this as an opportunity to readapt itself to new challenges, including the climate change challenge, by maybe choosing new, more resilient materials, adapting existing methods. Within this strategy, there was also very much a very clear call to action and motivation that ALIF wants to put cultural heritage at the forefront of global discussions on climate change. So we are trying to be as active as we can, not just at UNFCCC, but and COP processes, but also, in different regional level international conferences and congresses such as this one. And so with all that in mind, there is this ambition to launch comprehensive program to protect tangible and intangible heritage affected by climate change in vulnerable countries. And we, in the strategy, sort of outlined, three sort of entry points to do this. So, of course, supporting first and foremost very concrete conservation and rehabilitation projects in the field. But we also thought that it would be interesting to support the dissemination of traditional know-how. And finally, also, we are motivated to support more research-based projects or capacity-building projects that do promote and kind of bring forward some new solutions and sort of methods to protect cultural heritage against climate change. And so with this idea of developing a program, ALIF set itself up to launch 2 call for projects in 1 year that have a specific focus on climate change. First and foremost, between 2024 and 2025, we did a call for projects on Africa and climate change. And just recently this year in 2025, we just closed our call for projects in Central Asia. And so the next part of my presentation is just to give you an overview of the call for projects that we did in Africa and that has just closed and is being launched as we speak. So ALIF in many ways indeed is a funder, but it is also a very active operator on the ground. We have a very large network of sort of operators. And before launching call for projects or programs, we also do our own, internal research, as well as extensive scoping missions, so that we're really understanding the landscape within which we are operating. And as I mentioned just before, Africa was a region, with the exception maybe of North Africa, the Maghreb, it was a region that we hadn't yet implemented a number of projects. So in many ways, it was a new continent for ALIPH, and we were very keen to sort of first and foremost understand the different challenges that the continent was facing. And so, you know, here what obviously was a motivator for ALIPH, because its genesis was very much in the conflict zone. In Africa, it was this sort of opportunity to bring this nexus together, because climate change is a threat multiplier and can exacerbate conflicts. So in that sense, it made sense for ALIPH to expand its scope to climate change so that it could work at the nexus of conflict and climate change. Particularly in Africa, of course, where we were seeing a lot of displacement in areas of growing desertification and extreme heat and drought, which was leading to sort of local, but also regional conflicts. There's also, of course, a struggle for scarcer resources, such as water, food, but also subsistence materials. And something that, of course, we're aware of because we have one or two of projects that deal with this. There are a huge amount of local, regional farmer-herder conflicts, but also conflicts between pastoralist groups. So then here, as we were kind of working through what this call for projects should be about, what could priorities be about, we used actually this map to kind of help us map a little bit those climate issues. So here, just in different colors, we've got sea level rise, desertification, droughts, extreme heat, but also heavy rains. And then on this next slide, we kind of juxtapose it with our sort of broad ideas, but also based on already some very initial early discussions that we had, and that were going to sort of help us with identifying projects and operators, and also defining our scoping mission. So obviously, when it comes to sea level rise, which is the red part, we started to understand that coastal sites were going to be very much affected. And there is a huge amount of these really interesting historical sites along the Swahili coast, but also West Africa. So we kept that at the back of our minds. Increased desertification in green, obviously, you know, has a broad impact on kind of all heritage, but we were thinking in particular around built heritage and maybe Mauritania and the Sahel, but also institutions. I mean, desertification also means that some institutions are having issues to retain staff. So capacities are maybe also an issue when it comes to institutions. And then collections, we're very aware that sort of old manuscripts, for instance, and kind of dust and sand is very much eroding these unique collections, particularly in Mauritania. Then yellow with increased droughts and extreme heat. Also thinking about collections, but also intangible heritage, which can lead to displacement, of course, which then also can create local tensions between displaced and host communities. And finally, blue with increased heavy rains. We very much were thinking about how is this going to affect the unique earthen architecture of those regions. And so then with a little bit this sort of tabletop mapping exercise, we kind of came up with priorities for the African climate change call. And we really wanted to identify projects that address the intersection of climate change, cultural heritage, and Africa. But because this was our first call on climate change, we also said that we would be open to projects outside of Africa, particularly if it concerned maybe Afro-descendant heritage, but also not. It could also be in other regions that are extremely exposed to these, as long as there was very much this clear climate change cultural heritage linked. We're also very conscious of impact, you know, with sort of funding limits. We very much wanted to make sure that the projects not only had very clear conservation outcomes, but we also wanted to look at how they would increase the capacities of the beneficiaries. Would new job opportunities be created in the short, but also in the long term? A very clear, of course, notions around how it would combat climate change. And also, of course, the sustainable and peace building components would be prioritized. So in sum, this was a call that was opened during the last parts of 2024. We just sort of finalized over the summer the selection of projects. So we received an incredible number of applications, 286 in total from 65 countries, of which 47 were in Africa. And so we shortlisted 22 projects. And through these 22 projects, ALIF was able to reach 13 new countries. So working in 13 new countries since the beginning, since this year, sorry. And they're just listed at the bottom, including one in Latin America and the Caribbean, Brazil. So maybe just to, since I'm on Brazil, I'll just use the last few seconds to give you an overview of just a couple of projects that were selected to, in some sense, show you the diversity of the projects and to give you a sense of the types of projects that ALIF now funds in the climate change space. So here, this is a project for Brazil, which very much focuses on the Guato people and also these archaeological mounds, which were constructed over 4,000 years ago, and they have sort of a protection mechanism against different flood cycles. So these are kind of at risk of collapse, and so we're doing a lot of documentation, but also transmission of traditional knowledge to younger generations. We're also going to, you know, construct or kind of enhance some of the water-filled moats around different earthworks so that we can mitigate sort of erosion, but also fire risks, which have come up as an issue in this case. Going to Africa, so this is also another project that was selected and is due to be launched very shortly. It focuses on the World Heritage Property of Agadez in Niger. And as you can see from the photos, this is very much a historic city of sort of earthen architecture. And here we're going to support the restoration of 15 houses because this site is very much facing extreme weather events. So on one side, dry spells and desertification, but also on the other hand, in 2024, there was these extreme heavy rains. And so these houses are really sort of being stretched to withstand completely polar opposites types of hazards. So what we're trying to do is very much build the next generation of traditional of masons. So there's this intergenerational capacity building between current traditional masons and youth, but also revisiting a little bit the techniques that are used, but also the banco mixture that is used to plaster the walls so that it is a little bit more resistant to both types of extreme events. So very interesting project indeed from sort of an extreme climate change perspective. Here, so not a site, but actually a museum, which is situated in a very remote but very forested region of Guinea, which is called Zérékoré. And this museum, like many museums in the country, were built in the 1990s, but without much consideration for the local environment and ultimately the objects. So ultimately thinking that this would be a space for unique objects that would be stored and exhibited. And so Zérékoré is a region where it experiences for 80% of the year rains. And so here this museum is really dealing with out of this world humidity levels coming from the roofs, from the walls, and from the grounds. So this project is really going to try and do a very clear assessment of the humidity issues and to implement a very solid and robust climate control system. Ideally, it would be something that is sustainable, low energy, that maybe builds on sort of local knowledge of how other buildings in the region manage humidity levels. And then after this, it's really with the purpose to make the museum fit to, in fact, receive collections that are stored elsewhere, just because right now it's impossible to store anything in those conditions. Maybe giving just a little bit of a natural heritage side. So this is also a project that was shortlisted under the 6th Call for Climate Change for Africa. Indeed, it's not in Africa, but it was open to other countries, as I mentioned. And so we are going to fund this really wonderful project in the Mughal Gardens in the Kashmir region. And here we're also dealing with a water management issue, which is that the gardens are sort of facing quite a lot of challenges because of decreased snowfall and kind of accelerated glacial melt due to climate change. And so this is kind of reducing the flow of water that goes to the gardens. So here, this is really about getting a team of hydraulic experts to really evaluate the water management system and to restore, hopefully, the original hydraulic system with improvements. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'll look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for your presentation. At the end of the session, we are going to have the Q&A moment. Now, I'm going to present the next speaker. William Megary is Reader in Archaeology at Queen's University Belfast and Principal Investigator at Preserving Legacies. His research is focused on the intersection of cultural heritage and climate change, with a particular focus on education and promotion of climate action in the heritage sector. He is also an active field archaeologist, exploring themes of insularity and cultural adaptation in European prehistory. We are going to share with you a video sent by William.
Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Will Megary and I am the Principal Investigator on a project called Preserving Legacies, which I am going to speak to you about today. I'm also a reader in archaeology at Queen's University Belfast in Northern Ireland and was up until last year the focal point for climate action at the International Council on Monuments and Sites. I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you in live today online like I really wanted to, but we had a long-standing commitment via the ICOMOS working group to run climate literacy training in Ireland today, and several of us are there at that exact moment, working with heritage professionals on the island of Ireland to raise awareness and build climate literacy in the heritage sector. And that is a topic very close to my heart. It's also a topic at the very heart of the Preserving Legacies project, which I will talk about today. All good projects are made up of good people, and I want to acknowledge that I'm really just speaking here on behalf of an amazing team of about 12 or 13 individuals who have come together from all over the world to build the Preserving Legacies project. This includes members from Tunisia, Morocco, USA, Ireland, Venezuela, France, the Philippines, and Aotearoa, New Zealand. And indeed it is the diversity and dynamism of a team like that, drawing from a whole range of backgrounds, from climate science and communications through to archaeology, architecture, and adaptation planning, who place us in a powerful position to make a difference through the Preserving Legacies project. But what is this project? What is it that Preserving Legacies is trying to achieve? Well, the vision of the Preserving Legacies project is a world where communities lead their own climate adaptation, safeguarding heritage, and redefining resilience to build a more just and thriving future. This vision places people and communities at the heart of climate action and pushes back against more global movements which see these as top-down initiatives. Preserving Legacies is about starting change from the bottom up and placing people at the heart of decisions that affect their communities and their culture. In order to achieve this, our mission is to support local change makers with training, tools, and connections to equitably adapt their community's heritage places and practices from the impacts of climate change. And this really is the what of the Preserving Legacies project. We achieve this mission by providing training, by developing tools and methodologies, by empowering and equipping local change makers with this knowledge, but also the broader global connections to make equitable and effective adaptation decisions within their communities. Critically, these decisions seek not only to protect communities, but they seek to preserve their cultural heritage, that aspect of society which is so central to people and who we are. The broader Preserving Legacies goal, thinking to the future, is that by 2030, 3,000 heritage sites and cultural practices are protected from climate change through adaptation strategies designed by their communities. And this is an ambitious target. 3,000 sites and cultural practices represent an awful lot. So the question is, how do we achieve this? How do we make this happen? How do we realize the scale of this ambition, which effectively responds to the scale of the climate crisis? Well, the Preserving Legacies project is doing this in two ways. And I want to start off exploring our standard pathway, which welcomes sites from all over the world on a multi-year journey in training and action. And then finish the presentation today by focusing on a new initiative, which aims to scale this training from not just 30 sites, but to 3,000 sites by 2030. At present, Preserving Legacies has been running for 3 to 4 years. Each year, we welcome a new cohort of sites who go through an educational journey, bringing them from not really having any knowledge of climate change at all, through to being able to take effective climate actions which are appropriate for their communities. We welcome sites from all over the world, from Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea, to India, Bangladesh and Nepal, Mongolia. We have a huge cohort from Africa who join our sites, Europe, North America and South America. And this global representation on Preserving Legacies is critical because climate change is a global problem. It's also a geopolitical problem, and this necessitates our working together to overcome climate change and to respond to it in an effective way. Essentially, we need the knowledge of peoples from all over the world to devise solutions to this awful problem. The Preserving Legacies journey involves 4 steps. The first is empowerment. A and by empowering our participants to understand how to map their heritage values and think about climate impacts on heritage, we can then enable them to model and apply how climate change will impact their sites. It's also about training. By training all participants to conduct values-based climate risk assessments for their heritage places, we can create actionable and sustainable adaptation actions during their time in the project. By instilling participants with the capacity to design these workshops and to undertake these risk assessments, we uplift them as storytellers to be able to tell stories of their communities, to be able to share narratives of resilience about how they are responding to the climate crisis. And finally then, by bringing all these sites together from all over the world, we're able to develop a network of project participants, creating a foundation for a long-lasting, sustainable network for collaboration and dissemination for other projects, to share insights and resources, to inspire, train, and to roll out transformation across the heritage sector. We often say in the project that preserving legacies is not about places, it is about people. And our primary focus are on those people who we partner with. We want them to become leaders, we want them to become pioneers, we want them to become the next generation of climate activists within the heritage space. At the heart of the Preserving Legacies approach is the belief in plural knowledge systems. We acknowledge the value of different ways to approach climate change. But we also acknowledge that maybe in the past our approach has been overly scientific. That we have focused on scientific knowledge and scientific priorities and scientific solutions, often elevating these above older and deeper knowledge systems which may exist within our communities. These include the knowledge of indigenous peoples with their worldviews relating to their interaction with the environment. But also the knowledge of local communities, people who live in cities and landscapes, who maybe have lived there for generations, who have observed climatic change and developed responses appropriate for their environment. The Preserving Legacies approach acknowledges the value of each of these knowledge systems equally without prioritizing any one over the other. It acknowledges the importance of maintaining the integrity of each knowledge system. But it also believes that by bringing them together, these multiple strands create a stronger way of approaching the problem, providing an output built on the strengths of each, most suitable climate action in each community. This approach is critically based on respectful engagement, on co-creation, on equal partnerships, on the rights of community to engage or not engage, or the rights of them to engage and then cease to engage at later points. It respects and acknowledges the autonomy of communities and their rights of ownership over their own knowledge systems. Critically, it validates, supports, and strengthens this knowledge in places where often it has been looked down upon and subjugated in the past. And this approach is essential to climate action because it acknowledges the unique contribution which culture in all its meanings has to climate change. Culture is embedded in almost every part of climate change, from the impacts it has on our society to the vulnerabilities present which exacerbate these impacts. Culture lies at the heart of climate change. It also lies at the heart of climate action. The pedagogy of the project, which is how we teach and how we learn, has been developed over the years and continues to evolve as we learn how to engage with different communities. Given the dispersed global nature of our project team and our project partners, it's necessary to do a huge amount of this training online. And therefore, we engage through online virtual learning environments and platforms, but also through WhatsApp and email. We develop ways which adapt and are suitable for each individual site. At the heart of this journey is a training course which is run online with people. This provides both live and pre-recorded videos, but also the opportunity for people to engage in live fora with each other, to share their experiences, and also to undergo practical training through the use of manuals and worksheets which allow them to assess climate impacts and responses at their site. At the heart of this experience is the opportunity for each site to visit an in-person workshop in another country, to see how risk assessment and climate action happens in person. This practical experience allows them to take the information which they have learned throughout the year and transform it into knowledge by actually exploring how it is done at a site. The idea then is that they can take this experience and in later years in preserving legacies, develop their own risk assessments which is suitable for their communities. Preserving Legacies journey started off as a 3-year journey and is now extended into a 4-year journey for sites, where sites enter as foundation sites, engaging on this online learning course, developing a foundational knowledge of climate change and building foundational climate literacy. In second year then, they go on to develop and plan their own workshops at their sites, workshops which the subsequent year's foundation sites are then invited to. The outcome of this activation site year is a risk assessment, identifying key values at their sites which are at risk from climate change in the future. This workshop also seeks to identify adaptation actions or specific climate actions that can be taken at sites to help protect these values from the impact of climate change. Following this then, sites lead into an application phase where they go about being the leaders in climate change within their communities and within their regions. Sites from application sites come back and help us at other phases through this journey to support sites in their own transition through preserving legacies. Just to give you some examples from some of our sites. A key part of climate risk assessment is the process of values mapping, of understanding what is significant about our heritage places and what is at risk from future climate change. Sites understand values in a huge variety of different ways. And in this example here from Cotomacu in Benin and Togo, our wonderful site partner, Casimir, is illustrating where different attributes and different values are present within the landscape. But equally, the community is broken up into groups and are asked to draw and represent the things that are important to them. This visual form of values mapping is inclusive and ensures that the entire community get to contribute to the exercise. When working in Colombia, at the Anchor site with our wonderful partners here, the focus was on climate risk assessment. In this example, values workshops were held with different community groups within the archaeological site. And then a year later, a risk workshop was held which brought together these stakeholders into diverse groups to discuss climate impacts and risk within the future. This is one of our preserving site custodians, Charadina, leading a discussion on climate impacts and hazards at the Angkor archaeological site. The purpose of assessing risk at sites is so that good decisions can be made on adaptation. In these photos here, we see two examples from two of our initial sites in preserving legacies, the rice terraces of the Philippine Cordilleras on the left and Petra archaeological site on the right. Our colleague and friend Tahir Falahat is shown here working at the restoration of traditional Nabatean terracing structures and dams, which help reduce the impact of flash flooding within the landscape. This adaptation action was directly associated and identified during the risk assessment workshop held in Petra the previous year. Equally, at the Ifaga rice terraces, the importance of indigenous knowledge and indigenous actions in terms of landscape action was essential to prevent the degradation of this iconic and important landscape in the future due from changing climates. These slides have illustrated our 3 to 4 year learning journey of preserving legacies from sites. But the real challenge here is even if we take on an extra 10 sites per year, we're still not going to reach 3,000 sites. In order to do that, Preserving Legacies is developing its 3,000 by 2030 campaign based around an online community of action. This is an online platform where people are able to join, they're able to go through asynchronous learning, they're able to engage in discussions with people and access resources and worksheets, providing that practical guidance in climate risk assessment. They're also able to engage with members of the Preserving Legacies team at discrete points to ask specific questions and get specific support. The point of this community of action is that it's not limited to a set number of people. It can be open to heritage people from all over the world. These people can sign up to join, and they can go through this online journey, this online learning journey that takes them through basic climate literacy into risk assessment all the way through to adaptation. By going through this journey, it's hoped that 3,000 sites will engage in adaptation actions by 2030, which is the goal of the project. I hope that presentation has been interesting today. Again, my apologies for not being with you live to answer any questions, but please do feel free to send me any emails that you might have. Thank you.
We thank you, William, for the presentation and the work they're doing with preserving legacies. I think we could open now the Q&A time. We received some questions through the Q&A tool and through the chat, but we invite all the participants to send their questions through those options. We have a first question for Jenny. Could you share more about the experience between North America and Africa that you mentioned in your presentation? That map is very representative of Climate Heritage Network.
Thank you. This is a great question, and I'm so happy to get to talk more about it, but I'll be brief so that my colleagues can also have time to answer their questions. I've just placed a link in the chat to a report that announces the initial cohort of the Race to Resilience Culture project. It's going to give a little bit more detail about what the purpose of that project is, but overall, I will say each of these communities is receiving training from how to conduct risk assessments to how to identify and work with partners, how to engage with communities, how to deal with climate mobility and movement of people as climate change becomes more provides negative impacts to the spaces that they are caring for. So there are lots and lots of opportunities for them to work together to identify those shared solutions, and then again to innovate new ideas and new ways of addressing the climate crisis. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jenny. We have another question to Eve. What do you consider to be the greatest challenge in relation to climate change that the ICOMOS Working Group on Climate Action is working on at a global level?
Thank you, Mauro. It is a big one that we are all working on, probably in cooperation, because in cultural heritage sector, we all know the importance of culture in climate action. I would point out three major issues. One is actually that we know the importance of culture and cultural heritage, but in global policies it isn't very vivid yet. And at the moment, although the state parties of UNEF, CCC and Paris agreements have agreed that in the framework for global climate resilience, cultural heritage is a thematic target on adaptation. And there are two parts of that adaptation. First, protecting cultural heritage from the impacts of climate-related risks by developing the adaptive strategy for preserving cultural practices and heritage sites. It is already being agreed on. But the second part, that by designing climate-resilient infrastructure guided by traditional knowledge, indigenous people's knowledge and local knowledge systems, that actually this session was all about. It isn't in the bigger climate policies yet, and we do hope that on the way to Belém within Mondjakult and with specifically Belém having a specific topic on that that we can put that through, but it isn't certain yet. And two other major things that I want to point out is dealing with loss and damage. That we have nothing to do. Antarctic heritage is melting, going to the sea. Arctic heritage is going to the sea. We do know about some of the heritage, but we don't know it all, and it vanishes. The traditional knowledge and practices and cultural continuity vanishes. So actually, we have to deal globally with the loss and damage, and next toolkit of ICOM's climate action working group will be on loss and damage. And secondly, adaptation to be prepared for the extremes. Maybe it doesn't happen, but we must have that black scenarios at the moment at hand too, that when the crisis happen, when the very extremes happen, how do we deal that, and how do we protect before to be ready for the extremes, and with climate literacy trainings, with preserving legacies, in collaboration with Climate Heritage Network and many partners, we are trying to push these themes to the global policies as well as to the local agendas. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve. We have another question to Sophie. Among the strategies for tackling climate change, you mentioned a program to protect tangible and intangible cultural heritage. Could you tell us how the community is responding to this program?
Wonderful. Yes, thank you so much for the question. Maybe I didn't make this quite clear, but the program for climate change, and specifically the call for projects that we just launched in Africa is still at its very sort of early beginnings. But indeed, within that, maybe just to give a sense of communities, more broadly speaking, within this call, there was indeed very much a priority on ensuring that the beneficiaries, that is the communities, were involved as part of the consultations and the sort of elaboration of the project proposals. So the links between the applicant and the communities is something that we very much looked into very carefully, ensuring that these were as much as possible and where most relevant, very much bottom up community engagement projects. I suppose what will happen though, and this is something that we do with most of our major programs, is that we do conduct quite extensive evaluations. And so, of course, in the context of climate change projects at ALIF, the role of communities, not just as beneficiaries, but actors, will be assessed in that sense. And just to say, when we talk about communities, it can be a bit a broad term to use. But we at ALIF do not proceed on projects that do not have the necessary authorizations. And this can also be authorizations from community leaders, such as, traditional or religious leaders in a community. So we always make sure that this project, or that the projects that we are intending to finance, have got very strong endorsement, not just from the national authorities, but also from the local authorities, and where possible, the communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for the answer. We have another question for all the speakers. Considering that Mondiacult will be held in Barcelona in a few weeks, and that COP30 will then take place in Belém, could you share a brief comment on the importance of cultural institutions in implementing sustainable actions? Perhaps we could give the floor first to Jenny, then to Eve, and then to Sophie.
Yes, so I will just briefly say that my colleagues in Africa at the beginning of this month were able to attend the Africa Climate Summit too, in order to begin the conversation and start building momentum towards these events. So that is well underway. They saw a lot of success. We had 2 side events there in Addis Ababa. So we've already sort of started down that road. We obviously will be participating in Mondiacult and calling for culture at the heart of climate action. And fortunately, we're able to send a number of our delegates to COP30, including some of our youth delegation who are part of Youngo. So I'll hand it over to Ave and Sophie from there.
Shall I continue? Some of the side events for COP we are doing together with Climate Heritage Network and Architecture 2030, and we do hope that side event for COP30 on what can we learn from climate smart traditional architecture is something that contributes to mitigation, and there again it is a collaboration with Climate Heritage Network and some other institutions, but ICOMOS is part of, has been, ICOMOS Climate Action Working Group has been part of the contributing to UNESCO paper on climate action that is will be released in Mondiacult, as well as G20 declaration, as ICOMOS is observer party there. So several documents that are circulated at the moment with final touchings there. ICOMOS has been part of at least trying to highlight the role of cultural heritage, and exactly that I discussed before, the role of cultural heritage in adaptation and mitigation activities is a bit not so vivid there yet. So, but and thematic target 9 and the thematic goal 19 of the Belém work group, some of the organization, Climate Heritage Network, ICOMOS, are working on the solutions provided during Belém there. So let's hope that the voice of cultural and cultural heritage in cooperation with all of us can be heard by politicians there on the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve.
Yes, and maybe from just my angle, so ALIF doesn't implement projects, so we don't implement ourselves sort of sustainable actions in that perspective. We're a funder. But when you speak of sustainable actions, for me, what very much is at the forefront of ensuring sustainability in actions in general is that there is certainly a very clear silo between cultural heritage and climate change actors at ministerial level, at national level, and at local level. And from, for instance, again, this ALIF call for projects, not just in Africa, but the current one that we are indeed evaluating for Central Asia, what has actually really come out is that none of these proposals that we received, or none of the projects that we received, really put together into one project all of the actors that are required. So it's very much sort of projects that remain in the culture sector when it is absolutely crucial to bring in the authorities in charge of climate change, the authorities in charge of disasters and emergencies, if we're really going to have the onboarding of everybody to, in fact, sustain and align all of the actions that are required across these actors to make sustainable outcomes. But I think in general, indeed, cultural institutions have a huge role to play in implementing sustainable actions, especially in view of Mondiacult and COP. I mean, even as a cultural institution, I think we can set the stage and set the example for how the sector can decarbonize its operations, so that then it can kind of act as examples for some others. So kind of setting targets and different benchmarks for footprints in the culture sector at the institutional level would be great. Obviously, and I think this is something that Will McGarry was mentioning in his presentation, I think cultural institutions have a huge role to play in building climate literacy and action. So I think it's really, again, going to maybe those that do need more convincing, and those are outside of the culture sector, that do need convincing about why cultural heritage matters, and that it does have its own set of solutions to contribute to the debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. As we are arriving to the end of this roundtable, we want to thank you, all the participants, and in particular to Jenny, Abe, Sophie, and Will for participating in this roundtable at the International Congress of Culture in Climate Action 2025.